So without further ado, I'd like to turn this over to Dr. Pence. And so, Jim.
Thank you, Chuck. May I say again how much I admire your hairstyle?
It's a prerequisite.
Well, good morning, everyone. It's great to be here. As Chuck mentioned, we started this journey together Friday night, about 40 people, Friday night and Saturday morning. I said to them, and I'll say to you, it's always a great joy for me to work in congregations to see the dedication of a group of people that'll come out on a 7:30 on a Friday night to get started in a process. I want to explain how this works by asking you to imagine something. Imagine you came to church on a Sunday morning and a huge sinkhole had opened up all the way around the church property, and it's also filled with water. And so you come to church on a Sunday morning, and you have, like St. Matthew's is now surrounded by a moat. And you're kind of motivated to come to church because you worship together and you like to be together. And so you have a problem to solve, right? So Chuck walks up and he says, well, I know, we'll just call the Army Corps of Engineers and they'll come in and plop down a bridge and we'll all get to church. That's one way to do it. Another way to do it is to walk in and be like Keith Kuhn, who says, oh, let's just go fishing. Right? But a third way to do it is to say, we're going to construct a permanent bridge that is built on the solid foundation of where we are to take us across this span to the solid foundation of where we're going to be. And that's going to take some time, and we have to have architects, and we have to understand what the ground is like here, and then we have to know what kind of a span we're going to create so we can walk together, drive together across this bridge, and arrive happily and safely on the other end. Okay? The first model sometimes happens in churches in pastoral transitions, and that's the more common interim model. See? Churches in all denominations have interim processes where a pastor leaves, retires, and the Army Corps of Engineers, called the Synod or the Diocese, comes in and plops down a bridge. See? And I don't know what to say about the second model. But the third model I described is what is known increasingly as pastoral succession planning. The model was really created in the latest version in 2003-04 with the publication of a book titled Elephant in the Boardroom. And it's it's a book about and the subtitle is Speaking the Unspoken about pastoral transitions. A colleague of mine named Russ Crabtree wrote that book in 2003-04, and then he began to develop this pastoral succession model, which now I've been working with him, and now he's not doing this on site anymore, so I'm doing a lot of the work around the country to work with congregations to build this bridge. Last night, or Friday night, part of the bridge building is to understand the ground on which, on the other side of the moat. And so we had some honest conversation about, for example, I asked the question, when St. Matthew's is at its best, what is it like? If you'd like to see what the answers were from the people who were in the room Friday night, it's all still available for you on a wall posted in the fellowship hall. Because that's part of that solid ground on which this transition model is built. It's a process that begins by identifying what your strengths are, what you're good at, what you care about, and then constructing with a high degree of intentionality this bridge across the gap known as the transition to the point where the new pastor arrives on the solid ground in the church. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Thank you. I have one convert. So part of what I want to do this morning, very briefly, is say a little bit more about that construction process and then respond to your questions. And I invite all of those who were present Friday night and Saturday to jump right into the conversation and add your voice to it. The model is about, typically in this model, if there's anything that's typical, the process is like the passing of a baton in a relay race. Pastor Stevenson mentioned in her sermon this morning Ron Qualley, who is the pastor of Lord of Life Lutheran Church, 2 campuses in Fairfax and Clinton. Ron gave his congregation the gift of the notice of his retirement in December of 2013. And I've been working with them now throughout most of 2014, and Ron is retiring in January of 2015. So this typical model is the passing of the baton, because we're actually creating the vision for the transition with Ron still in his pastoral role. And so if everything works as we hope it will, Lord of Life will call a pastor. That pastor will be selected before Pastor Qualley retires, and they'll transfer the energy and the assets of a pastor who's been there 34 years, give or take, to his successor. So that's the model that typically works. Doesn't always have to work that way. Pastor Bohannon has been retired now for 14 months, so what the practice here will be is slightly different, but still the baton is going to be passed from those of you who know and love this church to your new senior pastor in this very intentional way. And I'll explain in a minute how that works. There are 6 key components to this approach to bridge building. The first one is that it is vision driven. And what that means is that the transition team is one of the groups responsible for building the bridge, and we began working yesterday morning on the creation of a vision to guide the congregation across the bridge. This is a very important part of the process, because once there's great clarity about what you're seeking and what you're looking for, then that can mobilize energy and activity in a congregation so they have a good sense of what they're trying to accomplish. Sometimes in these transitions, the only sense of vision is, well, we need to replace a pastor. And my contention is that's not good enough. I mean, you have to have a sense of what kind of process you want to use. How are people going to be involved? And so, again, you will see posted on the board in there several drafts of the vision statement created by the group in the retreat, and that they'll refine that and send it out to everyone. You'll have a chance to react to it. So this is this highly participatory process. You're all bridge builders in this model. Okay? It's vision driven. The second thing is that it's evidence based. I remember I've been involved in Lutheran congregations for the 43 years I've been married in 5 different states. And I know every time I was in a church with a pastoral vacancy, the model was pretty much the same. With or without an interim, call committees formed. Usually they're elected or appointed by the council or the congregation, depending on your constitution. Then they kind of disappear for months. And they, first of all, often work very hard on the creation of the call documents, which the ELCA calls the ministry site profile. And typically the call committee works hard, creates the process, then starts looking at candidates, holds interviews, and then at the end of that process, which can take 6, 8, 9, 10 months, a couple years sometimes, the new pastor is identified. You haven't been through a call for a while at St. Matthew's, so I don't know how much experience, but some of you may have a lot of experience at other places. I don't know if your experience is like that or not, but that was certainly my experience. This model is entirely different. The call committee still works in confidentiality with regard to the candidates, but as much of everything else is open and transparent and based on evidence. The evidence takes the form of a congregational survey which is administered anonymously. It's called the Church Assessment Tool, and it is developed by Russ Crabtree, who writes about pastoral succession planning. And you'll be invited, beginning as early, we hope, as next Sunday, to take this survey. It is available, it will be available electronically, and so for those of you who have ease with using computers, you'll get an email that has a link, you click on it, and boom. For those of you who aren't as comfortable or would like to, let me say it this way, for those of you who need to do it by hand, members of the transition committee will make a paper copy which you can have in the church, and you can take it and leave it at the church. You'll hear more about this going on, and I'll be happy to answer questions about it specifically. This is your chance to be a part of the creation of the bridge. Your voice is incredibly important because, to use this analogy again, we're going to build a different kind of bridge here than we're building at Lord of Life, see? Because the evidence that comes from that survey is your voice. Lord of Life's evidence is their voice. Part of that survey will be you get a chance to weigh in on the qualities of the pastor you seek. Part of it will be ideas about what areas of ministry you're interested in giving more energy to. It's a comprehensive survey. There are many hundreds and hundreds of churches in the database. So you'll also be able to compare St. Matthew's to other churches, other Protestant churches around the country, which is a very helpful thing. So vision-driven, evidence-based, transparent, lots of communication about process, lots of intake and conversation with everyone in the congregation, and then comprehensive. Because one of the things we want to do is to make sure that everyone understands that the call to a new pastor is just a part of the life and vitality of a church, because there are many, many more aspects to this, and the survey helps us identify some of those comprehensive assets. It's also intended to be customized for you, so the process, again, that's used here is not the same that's used anywhere else. And then finally, it is intended to be asset-focused. And what that means is that the survey tries to uncover what are the distinctive assets of this congregation so that pastoral candidates have a clear way of determining whether they wish to be considered, because they know enough about who you are, what you care about, and what you're looking for. I have lived in 5 states in my life. I've worked in congregations now in my consulting life in 15 states. My son-in-law is a Lutheran pastor. I hang around with clergy most of my days these times. And I know a lot of clergy people who are moving and interested in seeking new calls. The greatest fear they have is that the papers that the church files will not be a clear and honest story about who the church is, what they care about, and what they really need. Sometimes churches think, well, we have to put the best picture of ourselves out. And I'm here to tell you, based on my experience, that the best clergy people I've worked with would rather know the truthful story about who you are, what you need, and, frankly, what you think needs to be worked on. See? So this honesty, this transparency, this clarity is really helpful in attracting the best pastoral candidates to your call. The survey will be open for around, the current operating assumption is it'll start next Sunday, and it'll be available for 4 Sundays. I invite you to think about giving your church over the next 4 weeks about 30 minutes of your time. Some of you who are who are point and click types can do this in 20 minutes. Others may take a little longer. You have to do it at one sitting. You can't close down and come back and do it. So you've got to be careful about that. But I assure you that the gift of 30 minutes or so of your time will allow this bridge for St. Matthew's to be built with a much greater clarity, a much better understanding of what it is you all think and how you feel about the future of this church. So the goal is going to be to get about 250 responses, maybe more. If your average worship attendance on a Sunday runs 270, 280, we want to get 75 or 80% of that number to respond. Wouldn't it be great if you blew that away and got 300, see? Because the more people who weigh in on this survey, the more we're going to know about the hearts and the minds of the people of the church. And I'm happy to see many young people here today. The survey is open to people who are confirmed and above. Because the other important point is a population in the church that's often not asked their opinion are junior high and high school students. And you know, their opinion should count for something. So we're going to ask that the junior and senior high school students confirmed and above also participate in the survey. Final point about the survey is we will ask you to declare some demographic things like how old you are. Now remember, it's all anonymous, so nobody's going to know. Okay? But with that one fact, you can examine the data and find out how people in different age groups feel about the church. Do you know how helpful that is? For example, to start a new ministry, to find out that the 65 and older crowd agrees with the 35 to 65 who agrees with the under 35. I mean, you can mine this data for a lot of useful information. Sometimes in churches, well-intentioned leaders, church councils, and staff, again, kind of pour over and they say, well, what are we going to do? This looks good, that looks good. This model says the first question is, what do the people think? What do they want? What do they care about? And we collect that information and then we say, aha, let's go this way. See? I don't want you to leave here today, though, thinking that this is a very mechanistic construction project. This is also a process that really, really invites and cares for the work of the Holy Spirit. It is a call, not a hire. And so this process is also going to be designed to engage you in prayerful discernment and in consideration of what's God up to in the life of this church and who's God calling to provide pastoral leadership for you in the future. So we never want to forget that this call process is grounded in a spiritual foundation. Pastor Stevenson, actually, her sermon this morning, where's Taria? Will it hurt your feelings if I spoil it a little bit for people who weren't? Are you sure? Okay, all right. I took notes on your sermon. Is that okay? I should have warned you guys about this. You should have given it to me in advance. Anyway, Pastor Stevenson made two excellent points in her sermon this morning, which I thought are relevant to this conversation. Number one, growth rarely comes without some pain. Growth rarely comes without some pain. So I know a little bit of the story of St. Matthew's. And I invite you, as you go forward in this bridge building process, to imagine, to listen to the wise words of one of your pastors, that growth rarely comes without some pain. And the challenge now is to grow from that pain and move forward. The second thing she said, which I thought was very relevant, she talked about that everyone needs to belong. Everyone needs to belong. What I've already come to appreciate about this church is Friday night I asked people to tell stories about what the church is like at its best. And if you go in and read the results, people talked about being warmly welcomed. They talked about being taken care of. They talked about being connected to one another. They told stories of other people in the church and in the room that night who welcomed them and cared for them in their times of anxiety or need. You know, that's an asset to be transferred, you see? That hospitality, that welcoming, that doesn't just happen. It's not always going to be there without working at it. So part of this process is to remember that everybody belongs. And in this pastoral succession model, that's why everyone's voice counts. See? This is your chance to weigh in. And please take advantage of it. And then please be assured that you will know what you say, because the results of the survey will be shared quite openly. The results of the survey will be available to everyone to look at. And then the pathway, the bridge that's going to be built, is going to be based on your ideas, your prayers, your hopes, your dreams, and the wisdom of the people who are working in leadership in the church. So I guess that's it for me. And I'd be delighted now to respond to questions, and I'd invite anyone who's been involved in the process so far to comment on, correct, add to, or make fun of anything I said. Yes, sir.
You mentioned the survey, and that's something we're all excited to be doing. I think something we mentioned yesterday was really important, which is it's not just a survey to be done by a family together.
Thank you, Chris.
Each person's view is important.
Thank you very much. Thanks for that reminder. Yes, this is, on occasion I've heard told that husbands and wives don't always agree. I've heard that, for example. And so one of the important points of this survey is take it as an individual. And the other thing is, don't overthink it. Because what we're most interested in is you read a question, it'll ask you to agree, disagree. Don't overthink it. Just say, this looks like this is how I feel. For those of you who do need to take it by hand, I'm going to also really ask you to take it at the church, not take it home, not sit down at coffee with your 6 best friends and say, how should we answer number 12? That's not helpful. See, that's not helpful. Because we want your individual voice, your honest opinion, and thank you, Chris, for reminding me about that. Please, Mike.
Sometimes in situations like this, people are somewhat reluctant to raise their hands and ask their questions. So, as members of the transition team, it's been recommended and we highly endorse inviting anyone to a cup of coffee to ask questions one-on-one, and we'll be certainly anxious and willing to do that. And Chuck has offered to pay for those.
Thanks. That's the goal. The purpose of this transition team is to manage the survey, but also to be the ears and eyes of the transition. So thank you, Mike. I hope the transition team will advertise who they are every Sunday and invite conversations, quiet ones, private ones, public ones about what they're thinking. So thank you, Mike, for volunteering that. Yes, sir.
Do you have measures of success?
Yeah, I think, part of the measures of success, first of all, I've done this survey for a variety of purposes around the country for years, and there's only 2 times that I can recall that we did not get a 75 to 80% return rate. I think that's important because that means that perhaps I'm explaining well the virtue and the value of the survey. The feedback I've received, both from the survey and from this process in every church so far, has been pretty positive. Now, what I don't do is headhunt. See? In other words, I don't have anything to do with the process of identifying candidates. So the measure of success that I have is that the documents that the churches and the ELCA and the UCC and the Presbyterian Church, all the denominations I've worked with, the denominations have also said that my churches have among the best profiles they ever see. And that to me is very healthy feedback. I also have worked very hard to work collaboratively with dioceses and presbyteries and synods because I don't want to be in conflict. But I am an advocate for the congregation in helping to get its act together, so I get that feedback that's positive. The final feedback and measurement is when the candidates come, I try to keep in touch with call committees and find out, did you get the pool of candidates that fit the bill? And again, so far, God be praised, it's worked pretty well. Because again, the congregations take such great ownership of the process that it works very well. A couple of times, frankly, in larger congregations, the process of finding the right person has taken longer than any of us have wanted, and part of that is you can't control the pool, right? And so I'm a little frustrated with that. This is not a method to get a pastor faster, okay? It is a method to get the best pastor at the right time for the right purpose. And so part of what we hope and pray is that God moves these right candidates to enter the pool. But I'm not aware of any church in the 12, 14 of these I've done over the last 3 years where there's been anything that I have found to be unhealthy or not working.
Speaking of that, would you comment on what, at least the idealistic or hopeful?
The hopeful timeline, thank you. The hopeful timeline is survey over the next 4 weeks. I come back for the second retreat on October 24th, 5th. I'll be present here on Sunday morning again to give the initial report on the material. And then at that point in time, the transition team can, very possible in this model, then the synod can then push the green light and candidates can begin looking at St. Matthew's, perhaps before Christmas, but I'm very confident in early January, which means that the call committee can get rocking and rolling in early 2015. And at that point, it's kind of hard to say, but it is, I think, friends, very possible for you to be looking at issuing a call in March or April, maybe even sooner. Okay? Again, this is not a way to get a pastor faster, but it's a way to get the bridge built more solidly sooner, and then the process can unfold. Sir?
It's not clear to me as to what we're even looking for. Are we looking for a senior pastor, or are we looking for a complete restructuring of the pastors that we have here?
That's above my pay grade.
Is that part of the survey?
Yeah, I mean that is part of what we are working with the transition team and the council on, is to structure the survey in such a way that we can find out what the points of view of the people are.
So we're not looking for an individual, we're looking for a structure of the entire ministry.
I'm not going to say yes to that because the transition team has not yet. I gave them some materials late last night to be thinking about. I don't. Again, here's what I can say as a general practice. These processes are not about starting from scratch, right? The individuals who fill roles is a different question. But part of what I think the survey will do is help understand what are the goals and the ministry goals that the people in this church have. And then the task of leadership is to match the structure to the goals and the vision for ministry. So I know that sounds maybe a little wishy-washy, but we're still working on the creation of the customized part of the survey, so I can't answer what it is we're going to be looking at yet. So Chuck, do you want to weigh in on this, or anybody from the church?
Come on, Chuck.
I would say that we are hoping that, and hope certainly is not a method, but we pray that the survey will give us the information we need to answer those questions, and that you will be open and honest enough in that survey to be able to say things like, well, I think we need a new pastor,
Yes.
or a new senior pastor,
Yeah.
or I think we need whatever it is, whatever your feeling is.
John.
We need to understand that.
That question was raised yesterday with the transition team and the representatives from the council who are going to work with the transition team to make sure we communicate with one another. That discussion has been underway for a number of months. It was introduced with our previous interim pastor. We haven't concluded it. So when you see this name tag and you say, I'd like to tell you something, Keith, or Mike, or Nancy, or Chris, or Hal, I'd like to tell you something about how I feel about what's going on. Well, first off, before you tell me, please take that survey, because there'll be a lot of stuff you'll see in that survey that might help you focus on what you want to say to me. But as much time as you need to tell me, we will be available. But that question is still pregnant.
You'll have our emails, our phone numbers, yes.
We'll be in the narthex forever.
In your Sunday school class. At the choir.
In the choir, yes. Cleaning toilets too, on the softball field. Okay, yes, sir.
Could you talk a little bit about the identification of the pool of available folks?
Sure.
Would you introduce yourself to this gentleman? Mentioned so many times.
You were mentioned, yes.
I'm Chris's dad.
No, you're not. You were affectionately referred to so often that it was important that you.
In a very good way.
Yeah. Please now.
Well, the question really is identifying the pool from which to pick. And I know that in some cases, some of those folks will be folks who have submitted their mobility papers that said, hey, I've done everything I can do here, it's time to move on.
Sure.
Or boy, if I have to put up with Mrs. Jones one more Sunday, I'm just going to walk. And in some cases, it's just been that the congregation's not been satisfied with a person in terms of the theology or,
Sure.
or the ability
Sure.
to
Sure.
communicate or whatever it is. And in some cases, there are folks that will be referred to us, like you'll get a phone call. We have got the neatest guy for you here in Texas. That's John Turnquist talking.
Yeah, that's it.
John has 3 names. And these folks are happily engaged where they are, and we would be sort of the dive bombers coming in to snatch them away.
Mm-hmm.
So that can get you a whole variety of kinds of folks.
Right.
Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, I will. I have, since I've been working in this synod a fair amount, I think developed a pretty good relationship with Amy Savimley. And I know that the synod, every synod in the ELCA, for example, I mean, the rules say that they do it all the same, but I guarantee you they don't, because the personalities of bishops and that kind of stuff affect. But in general, the ELCA wants the synod to vet candidates. And that's actually a good thing, because there are pastors who want to move around for reasons which they don't want to let on. And so if there's been any shenanigans going on, bishops call bishops, and they try to find out some things about the status of people. So that's a good thing. Lord of Life, I'll use Lord of Life, for example. I was there yesterday and met with their call committee. They have names, right? They're not sure they have enough names, and they're not sure they have names that will give them what they're yielding. So we did a little brainstorming, and they are taking a very active stance. Ron Qualley wrote emails to the 250 pastors of the large Lutheran churches to say, I'm retiring. Pay attention to Lord of Life. Okay? I did give them some names. My daughter works at Luther Seminary. I know a lot of pastors. I mean, I would do that here too once we get the profile done. So I think the point is, it's like I spent most of my life in higher education, and I probably hired 300 faculty members. Okay? The best ones came from the search, not the sift. Do you know what I mean by that? So if a search committee sat back and just got the applications and sifted through, and said, "Wow, look at those, they dropped out. Let's look at those." I said, "Let's go out and find. Let's go search. Let's go looking." So you will be invited as a congregation once the profile's done, once you're clear about what you want, to submit names. And I really think that's a healthy thing for a church. I really do. The other point is, I think the call committee wants to work closely with the synod and really tell them what you want and what you think. There are synods that have been heavy-handed in sort of giving candidates to churches, and the ELCA polity says congregation has a lot of autonomy at the end of the day. So I do believe that who you are, what you care about, who you know is really important. And this is I can already tell you, let me put it to you this way. If pastors out there looking for calls are cats, you're catnip. This will be a nice call for people. So I don't think you need to worry at all about constituting a pool. The biggest challenge these days is actually pastors moving around and dealing with issues like housing. If they have children in schools, those kinds of human things. But as far as the identity and the value and the mission of this place and who it is and who you are and what you stand for, I think you're going to be attractive. Even with Keith. Why am I picking on Keith? I don't know.
Over on the left here.
Please.
I'm very heartened by this discussion. I appreciate the information and the intelligence, and I have immense trust and faith in the people who are on our call committee and our transition committee. I thank them for their time. I'm very heartened by that. I know this is going to be a great process. I know I am very confident that it's going to be a successful and positive situation. In the event of that 0.% chance that this is not a good fit, I'm just curious logistically of us getting out of that relationship. Is there a situation, are there steps in place where if in the very, very, very off chance that it is a bad fit, are we able to rectify that?
Boy, that's, thanks for all these hard questions. All right. I guess, let me just say this. I think in general, I was thinking about this morning, in fact. The call to churches can break off relationships. It's not easy, right? And I would say it's a little bit like going in. The relationship between a pastor and a congregation is a little bit like a marriage, right? I mean, when you go into it with skepticism or a little bit of skittishness, that may influence how things work. I guess I would say that the best attitude is hopeful and trusting and faithful. And then if things don't work out, address them as quickly as possible. The hard part is, if within a short time that it's not going to work, the best thing is to start talking about it right away, because there are ways to make adjustments. The worst thing is to bury it or wish that the issues... I'll just give a perfect example. In my academic career, we hired a new president at the college where I was dean, and I think most of the faculty and staff knew within 2 months that this wasn't going to work. But, the board wanted to protect their investment, and we labored for a couple years. And then the board finally saw the light. Now, that's part of the example. We tried, but we knew. So if the match is good and the intentions are good and the faithfulness is there, I think that's sort of the attitude to go into it. But if in that small percentage, The wrong thing to do is to be silent. Yes, ma'am?
Well, I think too, the fact that we will have a team in place when a new pastor comes to welcome them, to help them to get to know the
Yeah.
area, the congregation.
Thank you, Peg.
Makes a huge difference as well.
Yeah, thank you. Man, that's one of the features of this model is that the creation of what's called a startup or a welcoming team right from the beginning that spends a lot of time welcoming the new pastor into the community and helping that person build relationships. Again, you haven't had a new pastor for a while, a new senior pastor, so part of the point of all of this is to be really intentional about welcoming the new person with a curriculum of 3 to 6 months that will give this person an opportunity to get to know you. So thank you for that reminder, too. Anything else I've forgotten that you all want to correct, help me remember?
At the risk of being spoken to by our choir director,
Boy, I wouldn't want to do that either, man.
I would invite, if you have interest in seeing the wall,
Yeah.
to go check the wall out and let us choir get ready for
And
11 o'clock.
I'll go in the
And-
fellowship hall and respond to questions, too.
And Jim will carry on in fellowship hall if you have further questions. And thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.